Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Ivory, and you are tuned in to the Embracing Neurodiversity podcast, where I share my personal journey of embracing and enhancing the experience of my amazing son who is on the spectrum. Through this journey, I've discovered a lot about myself and continue to grow every day. My goal is to provide you with some useful insights and stories that will inspire you in your own parenting journey. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, everybody. Hey, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in per usual. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please share with those who you feel this can be helpful to. So, I want to start with a question. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to get a response from you all in the immediate, but I hope that it is a question that you all can reflect on. Have you ever had like a really big, ugly cry and then felt better after? I want to offer that as a way to suggest that not only is crying okay, but perhaps it is essential and important, right? In most recent years, I have been training myself and to cry more often. And the reason why I say train myself is because I remember it was a time where I could feel myself wanting to cry. You know how you have like that frog in your throat, or your stomach is turning in your body. You can feel in your body that you want to cry, but like physically, I just wasn't able to do that. And I now know through like doing the work of self-discovery that in growing up in my household, when you cry, you were told immediately to stop crying. Like it was a sign of weakness. And so I learned very early to not show emotions in that way. And even in adulthood, I experienced this like that, right? And so immediately when, I feel this need to cry, when up until recent years, when I felt this need to cry, my body would just get very like tense, or I would get uncomfortable. So I started this practice, especially in the car when I'm by myself, and music. That's the best time to cry, honey. That is where I cry the most. But I started to tell myself, it's okay, you can cry. And that gave me it gave me permission to feel, right? And crying can be uncomfortable sometimes. It can be exhausting sometimes. And I still feel settled by it often. And so I'm trying to work through that for multiple reasons, which I'll talk about in a minute, where the unsettling comes from. The reason why I wanted to talk about this today is because yesterday, my son, Khalil, who you all know is on the autism spectrum, had it wasn't the worst meltdown he's had, but it was the top 3. And he had it twice, back to back. And it lasted, sometimes when he has meltdowns, because they are incredibly heartbreaking, incredibly heart-wrenching, I shut down, and I kind of go within myself. So I lose track of time because I'm sort of like trying to stay calm and patient so that he can just sort of like go through the process of regulating. But more times than not, when he is in the midst of a meltdown, I attempt to model the behavior I want him to see. I want him to model, so remaining calm and stoic. But after a while, because I am incredibly human, honey, I start to break down myself. I start crying, and then it's kind of like a transfer of energy in a lot of ways. And I know a lot of autism parents out there know exactly what I'm talking about. But I'll start crying, and we're both just sitting there crying mess. But also with that, I begin to just sort of think about like the difficulties that come with raising a child on the spectrum and the grief that comes with it. Because for me, like, my son having autism is not a problem for me. Who he is who he is, and I would not change anything about him. What I struggle with is seeing him struggle. That is the peace comes with having autism and learning how to regulate when you feel overstimulated. That's difficult for him right now at this age in his life. The meltdowns are the top two things that, like, I just absolutely, it is incredibly heartbreaking to see my son struggle in those moments, right? There's no other pain that I can compare it to. The grief is like overwhelming, and I feel it in my body. I literally feel my heart breaking sometimes when I watch it happen, and when I watch Khalil having meltdowns in there when he's having the really, really bad ones. And thankfully, I want to name that it doesn't happen often. It happens probably once every 2 or 3 months in terms of the huge meltdowns that last, it feels like an hour. You know, he has his small moments where he gets frustrated, overwhelmed, and maybe have a little crying session or a little screaming session for a couple of minutes. But this is different. What happened yesterday? So I just completely broke down, and the tears were just pouring, and I was doing a lot of talking to my source about the pain and anger that, I experienced from seeing my son suffer or struggle in those areas. And, I just didn't think I was going to make it through. I was just like, I don't think I'm going to be able to pick myself up off this floor. That's how bad it was. But when the crying ceased, and it always does, sometimes you think when you allow yourself to cry that you'll cry rivers and you won't be able to pull yourself back together. And sometimes you will cry for a long period of time because that's what you need, but you will be able to pull yourself back together. So after my crying spell, child, I sat there, allowed the emotions to take their course. And then slowly I realized that I was feeling better, that I could get up and I could be emotionally available to Khalil. I try to make it a point that whenever he has a meltdown and then he's done and he's calm, to give him a hug or to affirm him, because I know that this is an area of struggle for him, and I know that he's not doing it intentionally, and so I don't want him to hold on to that shame. So I try to, affirm and give him hugs and kisses. And I was equipped to do that in the moment because I was able to have this emotional release through allowing myself to cry and scream. And, it was one of those not run out your nose cries. And of course, it had me for reflecting on, I wonder if we allowed ourselves to cry more often, regardless of who you are, because I know there's a stigma when it comes to men who cry or people of color. We have so many of these barriers about not being able to be human based on our identity. But that's a whole nother conversation. But I wonder if we allowed ourselves to cry more, what would that do for us emotionally, mentally, even physically? And of course, I got to researching, honey, because that's what I do. And Harvard Health actually did name that crying releases endorphin. And endorphins is a positive chemical, if you will, that enhances your mood. And so they said the studies have proven that crying releases endorphins, that crying helps with your physical health, because when you suppress your tears, let me step back really quickly. Also, crying is a direct result of experiencing pain or grief or anger. And also, crying could be a direct result of feeling joy and peace. It is a result of having an emotion. And if you suppress that, it festers in your body. And so the research shows that you can, if you suppress your tears, it impacts your health. It can raise your blood pressure, cardio issues. Learning to allow yourself to cry is a skill in itself, but it definitely can be therapeutic if you allow it to be. And it can be healing if you allow it to be. Sometimes I will carve out a couple of minutes to intentionally cry because I can feel myself. I can feel anxiety probably coming up, or feel myself getting overwhelmed, I'm like, I think I need a moment. So I put on a song that I know is going to make me cry. And I just give myself some moments to cry. And I think it's been one of the things that has helped me to forge forward. But I also want to go back to how I know it had been uncomfortable for me is because even when it shows up in my son, outside of the meltdowns, but just crying like kids do when they don't get something their way, or when they're feeling an emotion about something, or sad or overwhelmed, or, natural human emotions. And when my son Khalil starts to cry as a result of one of many of those things, I can feel myself wanting to say, Khalil, stop crying. But I'm reminded, thankfully, to not take that away from him, to give him that space. Now, as he's crying, I could feel myself getting irritated, frustrated, and uncomfortable because I have been socialized to see crying as a nuisance. But I am learning to lean into it for my son and myself because I'm learning that it can be incredibly healing, right? And I want to offer that to you all as parents, that when you feel a need to cry and to scream, to go to your room and get a pillow and cry it out, scream it out, punch it out on your pillow. And I also want to offer to you to allow your child the space to do the same thing. The last part that I want to add to that is that when you find yourself crying often from sadness and grief and it's uncontrollable to the point where it interferes in your day-to-day, then I would encourage you to get professional help, right? To allow yourself to cry and to journal it out, but also perhaps there's someone that you should talk to be able to unpack some things a little bit more clearly and give yourself an opportunity to hear someone else's voice to encourage you. Don't feel like you have to grieve in isolation. Grieving is a natural part of the process. Raising a child on the spectrum, you don't have to do it alone as well. My intention was not to make this a sad podcast episode by any means, but I guess by nature that comes with the topic of the conversation. I was definitely reeling from yesterday's episode with Khalil and my crying episode too. And when I learned, I feel it necessary to teach, and I learned a beautiful lesson yesterday. In that moment of my own breakdown, I had a bit of a breakthrough. And so allow yourself to break down. Sometimes it can make you more resilient if you allow. So until next time, take care.